Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. As Katie mentioned, my name is Laura Rogers, and I am the interim head of the Office of Violence Against Women and the director of the SMART office at OJP. As part of the commemoration of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, the Department of Justice, through the Elder Justice Initiative, the Office of Violence Against Women, is hosting the roundtable discussion with the judges from around the country who will share their views and experiences from the bench as they presided over elder abuse and elder financial exploitation cases. Today's roundtable is being live streamed, and I'd like to welcome those of you who are online as well as those of you who are in the room with us today. Research tells us that abuse of the elderly is prevalent, with estimates that 1 in 10 elder adults who live in their homes suffer abuse each year. Sadly, this figure is most likely an underestimation of the scope of abuse, neglect, and exploitation against this population, given that many cases of elder abuse are not reported or detected. Estimates for every single case that is reported that comes to light, another 24 cases remain unreported. A reported case rises, too few victims are receiving assistance. As a result of elder justice, this is one of the department's highest priorities. Between the elder fraud sweep earlier this year to the Rural and Tribal Elder Justice Summit, the department has significantly increased its efforts to combat elder abuse, elder neglect, and elder financial exploitation. The department, through the Office of Violence Against Women and the Elder Justice Initiative, we are supporting states and local prosecutors and law enforcement through the development of training tools and resources, all of which is housed at the department's Elder Justice website, which you can find at www.elderjustice.gov. We at the Office of Violence Against Women remain committed to addressing the needs of victims of abuse later in life. Since 2006, 106 communities have received funding through the Office of Violence Against Women, enhanced training and services to end abuse later in life program. Abuse later in life grantees have provided victim-centered services to hundreds of older victims and training for thousands of law enforcement officials, prosecutors, victim services providers, and judges. Each year, in partnership with Victims Without Violence and the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, which is providing logistical support for today's roundtable, OVW supports the Enhancing Judicial Skills and Elder Abuse Case Workshop. This workshop enables judges and judicial officers from different jurisdictions and various levels of experience to train and learn about elder abuse from one another as well as from faculty experts. Today, it is my honor to introduce you to your facilitator and my friend and colleague for the roundtable, OVW's acting director, the Honorable Katherine Sullivan. Katie joined OVW after serving on the bench for the last 11 years in the 5th Judicial District Court in Eagle County, Colorado. During her judicial tenure, Judge Sullivan presided over 45,000 criminal and civil cases, including domestic violence cases, as well as numerous sentencings. She worked tirelessly with victim advocates, victim representatives, law enforcement, and court staff to develop procedures and policies to ensure victims' rights in her courtroom. In 2016, Judge Sullivan was awarded the 5th Judicial District's Judge of the Year Award. Prior to her becoming a judge, Katie served as a deputy district attorney in Colorado's 9th Judicial District, where she prosecuted many cases involving domestic violence. She also served as the district attorney representative on a community-based Collaborative Domestic Violence Task Force. Katie brings enormous enthusiasm and energy to her role at OVW. Please join me in welcoming Judge Sullivan. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful roundtable.
Thank you, Laura. She's doing an amazing job running OVW. Doing a great job. But I want to get down to it. First, I would like to recognize Tony Bacon, who is the Department of Justice coordinator on elder justice. Is Tony here? She may have stepped out, but I just want to say that Tony brings such a passion and such an enthusiasm to this issue. When Attorney General Barr took his position, his current position as Attorney General, I know that Tony was one of the first people in his office saying, this is an issue, this has to be addressed. And because of her passion and because of his complete willingness to listen to what people are truly struggling with, he has really made elder justice a priority, and making sure that we are looking at every facet, whether it be fraud, whether it be the autonomy of our elderly, just every single facet of elder justice. So we can thank Tony for that, and we can certainly thank our awesome Attorney General for that as well. And then Andy Mao, many of you know him, but he is really the glue that put this entire event together. So thank you to Andy Mao. He is so fantastic, and I would do anything for him. So here I am today, and very happy to be sharing this space with fellow judges, all of whom I've had the opportunity to talk to a little bit, and I want to get right to it. What we're really hoping to do today is, I think, threefold. And one is we would like to, so I'm looking at all my friends from the Office on Violence Against Women, we want to look for gaps in training and basically education. That's why this roundtable is important. We want to figure out for the court system and maybe even the criminal justice system or the civil system, where are there gaps in training in this issue? Where are there places where we as federal partners can assist, right? How is the best, what is the best way to get to judges who are going to, because of the statistics that Laura talked about and that we all know about in this room, we know that there are going to be rising issues with elderly because baby boomers are getting old, and that's just how it is. And what are, some of the new trends and the things you're seeing? So we want to talk about that. What is the most effective way to message this elder justice issue? The other thing that we want to talk about, of course, is policy and what are, when we look at gaps, what are some policy directions? What are some changes that we could possibly look at doing on a more global scale? Whether that, what are some ideas or things like that? And I know that we have some real policy oriented judges on the bench, which is great. So what I love about these guys is they are all very different. They all have sort of a different expertise and a different outlook. So what I'd like to do is let you all get to know them a little bit. So with very brief introductions, they're each going to sort of highlight their favorite thing they're doing or the best thing that they're doing right now in order to address elder justice, and kind of talk from their own passion about that. And then I think that'll start to give us each ideas of what's working and what could work in other places. And then I'll start with questions. Each one of you has an index card, and you can share pens. I have one if anyone needs one. And if you want to write down questions, that's great. And then Andy, I just gave you a big shout out and you missed it, so thank you. Okay. So Andy actually will kind of be wandering around the room and if you just pass the cards to the end of your row, and he'll bring them up to me periodically. So we'd love to get questions from you. I have plenty, but we would really rather hear what you want to hear. So thank you so much. Let me start with my friend Judge Block. So Judge Block and I got to be friends when we had Tony Bacon again put together a rural elder justice summit, in essence, in Iowa. It was in Judge Block's hometown of Des Moines. And Judge Block is the presiding judge on a coordinated community response team that is funded by the Office on Violence Against Women. So that, very near and dear to my heart. Judge Block is extremely passionate about this issue, handles tons of probate cases, lots of guardianship cases, and really is the leader on this coordinated community response team. Judge Block, to you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Andy, and your crew for putting this together, inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. I feel like I'm the least qualified of the group, but I'm from Iowa, so we're always least qualified. I serve a county of about 500,000 people. Iowa, as most of you know, is a very rural, elderly state. I would rank in the top 5 probably of elderly population over 65. I serve in the area of probate, so all my cases deal with guardianships, conservatorships, all the estate matters, and I do all the elder abuse cases. In the 6 years that I have been serving on the bench, the number of cases have probably tripled from 6 years ago of what we're seeing. A lot of it is because of knowledge and education of the county attorney's office, the detectives, the police force, but there's still a big lack of knowledge and concern. And as Kate says, I am very passionate about this area. I speak whenever I have an opportunity, and one of my pet peeves is when you open up your internet or read the local paper, does anything ever pop on the front page of an elderly person being abused or financially exploited? You read about a murder, you read about a break-in, and maybe if the case got some notoriety, you might see it on page 10, lost in some section of the paper that you wouldn't look for. And it's an area that I scream and holler about with our local press, even TV stations. Why don't you put this on TV? It's not a big deal to them. It doesn't sell papers and it doesn't sell advertisements. And so as long as I can breathe, that is my motive, is to engage the community, engage people into this is a real problem. Not only financial exploitation, but just the elder abuse, people being injured by family members, by caretakers, and no one really seems to really care until it's too late and people die from this, which is unfortunate. So I work with the Department of Human Services on a closely basis. Every morning between 8 and 9, that's all I do is elder abuse cases. And ultimately, some of those end up in guardianships and conservatorships, which I preside over as well. So that it takes up a large part of my day just dealing with these kinds of cases and emergency cases that come up as the day goes on. And financially, the Department of Human Services typically is one of the least funded agencies. They don't have enough people, and they're overworked, and they have a ton of cases, and there are more cases to be out there to be looked into. There just isn't enough personnel, and legislators typically don't really care, and that's unfortunate. Education gets the bulk of the money in our state, and then it trickles down from there, and everybody's wanting to trim state budgets, And usually social services are the ones that get trimmed the most and the ones that need it the most as well. So my role on the CCR is we have about 135 members, covers a 16 county area. We meet at least every 2 months, and that committee has gone from about 20 individuals, which I was on the original steering committee as the judicial representative, to now 135, and we're expanding even more, and it involves state agencies, volunteer groups, Department of Aging, a lot of community services. It involves prosecutors, other judges besides myself, social workers, anybody and everybody, the religious side as well. So we have a big task, but we're trying to coordinate and have kind of like a one-stop shop where you can call and someone can steer you to the appropriate person to give you some assistance, agencies that can reach out and help, which is a big level of concern for most states and most individuals, is who do you call and how do I get help?
Great, thank you so much. And a question that I have, you said that you hear elder abuse cases from 8 to 9 o'clock every morning. How many days are you on the bench?
I do 4.
4 days on the bench. And so I have to say, for me, I guess maybe just being, I mean, that's actually quite a bit of time to set aside and dedicate to the one topic, to think that you're busy doing that every day, 4 days a week, as I think that in a rural community, that's a real, that gives us a visual of this issue. So let me go to Judge Dougherty and just say that I'm so impressed. She's from Nevada. She presides in Nevada. But I just want to say how impressed I am with her tireless work on policy and has helped to really push legislation. And you don't always see judges who do that crossover. You know, a lot of judges are just like, you do your job, I'll do my job. But this was so important to her, and she has such a passion for this that she's worked on some incredible legislation in Nevada. I think that comes from some cases that she handled, and she just saw a need. And I have to say, as a doer, I am so impressed that she would take this step. And so thank you. And so welcome.
Thank you, Judge Sullivan. I have to say I feel very comfortable and as if I'm in a room of friends, and the emanating mutual interest in this very critical topic is just palpable. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the National Council for Juvenile and Family Court Judges and the Department of Justice, because I quite frankly think we can't do enough fast enough to address what really is a crisis and an epidemic of abuse towards persons who are both vulnerable and elderly in our communities. I will very briefly tell you, Nevada comes from a place of recent substantial reform and overhaul of its guardianship system based on a history of horrific abuses and exploitation and diminution of individual rights in our state in and around 2013 and 2014, and revealed and discussed most clearly in the New Yorker October 2017 article, which details, much to our embarrassment, mortification as judges, and passionate need to rectify and correct what occurred in some of the lives of the people in our communities. And I will elaborate on that, but I will say we've gone through substantial reform. We are currently working and just passed a law reaffirming the individual rights of persons who are vulnerable and elderly to maintain their own decision-making authority, to maintain their constitutional rights, to not lose those rights to guardianships, and to use less restricted alternatives to protect those rights. And our governor just passed that bill, the supported decision-making bill, on May 16th, and we're so proud of it. But with that bill comes a lot of responsibility in working with stakeholders, in making sure that our stakeholders and prosecutors and law enforcement officers recognize the difference between family members, elder abuse and exploitation, and the protection of individual rights. I have to say, I am such a Washington, D.C. groupie. I become teary-eyed so easily in the mall, walking past buildings. I take pictures of every plaque. And on the Supreme Court, this time I noticed something I hadn't noticed before, which is just the 4 simple words, equal justice under the law. And just to say those words in relation to persons who are vulnerable and elderly is really quite radical, because we often project our beliefs and assumptions as to what those individual rights are, rather than recognizing each and every human in their individual capacity as having and retaining all of their rights for all of their lives, and our need to respect and protect those rights. And so I think the timing is perfect, and I'm so happy to be here, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I hear and I read an extended biography of you, and it seems that the autonomy of the elderly is really your focus and something that's so important to you.
It is.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Judge Yuhas, let me tell you what impressed me about Judge Yuhas, and that is he really participates in his community. So he's from Los Angeles County, California, has acted as a superior judge. Is that right? Were you a chief judge at one point? No, but just a superior judge. And but he maintains a lot of community involvement. And again, I can tell you as a judge, that's a struggle. He handles it absolutely beautifully, and I know makes a tremendous change by really being involved in community issues. So I'll pass it to you, Judge Yuhas.
Great. I would like to add my thanks for being invited to be here. Thank you, Judge Sullivan. Thank you, Andy. I would also like to thank those of you that are local to Washington, D.C. for what is an absolutely stunningly beautiful day. I'm sure they're all like this all the time. So thank you for that as an out-of-towner. As Judge Sullivan said, I'm from Los Angeles County. We are a population of roughly 10 million people. We have a huge county. Some folks are very, very wealthy, as I'm sure you're aware, and some folks are not so much. I think that the issue that struck me as Judge Sullivan was talking is the gaps in training and education. I don't believe that we are doing as much as we should be doing, not only to train and educate the bench, but also to train and educate attorneys and other providers of services that are out there. It's interesting because we keep talking about, for example, civil Gideon or civil legal representation, but that's always in housing and child custody and that sort of thing. We never talk about the other end of the family. I come from California. I'm certainly not taking a swipe at California, but I do a lot of work through the Center for Children, Families in the Courts, and it's children, families in the courts, which I think is kind of a misnomer, frankly. I think that we need to be thinking more globally and more holistically about the family, because the simple truth and fact about all of us sitting in this room is we are all going to become older. And so we all are going to have an experience with either a personal experience of getting older or our families, parents, that sort of thing getting older. And I think that we need to build on that experience and understand that experience, but understanding it more from just a personal way of looking at it, but how kind of resources are available in the community, how can we get lawyers involved in this sort of thing, how do we get the access commissions in the various states to pay attention to civil Gideon for an older people, that sort of thing I think becomes really critically important. So I'm very, very flattered to be here. I think that this is going to be a fascinating panel talking about the tribal issues, the rural issues, educational issues, and how can we all sort of talk together and meld them all together into one sort of idea.
So Judge Yuhas, I just want to say that you said that the Child and Family Division, is that right?
It's a part of the Judicial Council.
Child and Family, and it's a misnomer. How would you rename it?
I think I would drop out the children and families and just leave it the Center for Families. But I think you have to identify as part of that. I think we need to name things. I think when you name it and you speak it, it takes on a weight. And so if you're going to make it the Center for Families, you should also identify what you're going to do for later life folks, elder folks, that sort of thing, and make it more broad, define it more broadly, as opposed to focusing on children and dependency court and those sorts of things. Focus more broadly.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, and we have Judge Rowe, and some of you I'm sure know, but sometimes in certain states you have specific courts that deal with probate, and you have probate courts. I know in New York that's how it was. So you become a probate judge. Sometimes you're just assigned to probate court in bigger jurisdictions, and that is the type of court that Judge Rowe presides over. So this is what you do all day, every day.
All day, every day.
Yeah. So,
And I also would like to thank Judge Sullivan and Andy for welcoming us here. I'm very pleased to be on this very honorable panel here. I have already learned so much myself just this morning from speaking with the other judges. And it is interesting to learn what different jurisdictions do on these different issues, and I found that before. I've been on the bench for 15 years. I've been in every division. I spent 10 years in family, presiding judge in 2 different counties, 3 years in criminal. And the last 2 years have been the most rewarding of my career, and that is in general equity, where I deal with not just the wills and estates, but a large portion of my calendar is guardianships and special medical guardianships with end-of-life decisions and that sort of thing as well. Just to give you an idea of the area, I'm from New Jersey, and I think that everybody kind of pictures a very populated state, but there is a reason that they call this the Garden State. To give you a specific area that I work in, if you remember, some of you are probably too young, but those of you who remember Superstorm Sandy, there was a roller coaster that was in the ocean. I live about 8/10 of a mile from that, and I sit in Ocean County. Besides that claim to fame, however, what Ocean County has is it has also the largest number of retirement communities in the state. We have over 500,000 seniors, defined as over 65. As a result of that, we also have the largest number of guardianships in the entire state, and that even includes Essex County, where Newark is, and very populated areas. I carry between 175 to 200 just guardianship calendars, just guardianship matters a month, and they just keep coming in. They just keep coming in. I am honored to work with, as Judge Sullivan had indicated, the different. The way our court operates is that the guardianships are filed through the probate court. So I deal very closely with the county surrogate. Our county surrogate, when he was elected probably several terms ago, for the last 20 years, but one of the ideas, he was a school administrator, and the idea that he brought with him was to put a CPA, an accountant, and other accountants on staff. Actually brought the CPA in as his deputy surrogate, and she has made and her staff has made made it a policy that they follow the money. And this is the way that we've been able to prosecute a number of these financial exploitation cases, because we do have mandatory reporting requirements. They come through the surrogate's office, and those accountings are then reviewed by the accountants. We've had a couple of high-profile cases where we have been able to put a stop to that type of abuse. Additionally, I'm currently sitting on a committee to change to change our court rules to require essentially criminal background checks for any of our proposed guardians. The same way you would with an adoption or any of our children in court cases where it might be a termination of parental rights. We routinely do background checks on those people, but and it is a work in progress, but we've never done them on proposed guardians. And this is another way that perhaps we can stop some of the elder abuse. This is a calendar I'm very passionate about, as everyone else here is. It's the calendar that I feel that I've been able to make a difference with. Put people who are in unsafe housing into a safe environment, to remove people who are stealing from them as their caregivers, or caregivers who perhaps have been physically abusive to them. So it's a tremendously rewarding calendar, and the best of my career.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That's the CPA idea. I'm sure a lot of people wrote that down. Because you're right, follow the money.
And none of our other counties have it. We've tried to, unfortunately, the surrogates are run by the county.
Yep.
And of course, the judges are state, and never the twain shall meet. So, and we have a very, very strict policy on, the overlap of politics and being on the bench.
Of course.
So,
Thank you. Judge Long, he is the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indian Tribal Court. And so he is going to give us a perspective. The things that are happening in your community are really fascinating, but I do want to point out that Judge Long also brings a very 360-degree perspective to this issue, because he has worked in law enforcement. He also maintains a small private practice, and as he is an associate judge for the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa Chippewa Indians, he sees things from the bench. And so what a wonderful perspective. Tell us what's going on with you, Judge.
I will. Well, thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity. Like Judge Rowe mentioned, sitting and talking, it never ceases to amaze me how much we learn from each other. So I hope what everybody takes away from this are some new ideas. Gaps are always a key, but we all have a very different perspective. The area that I work in is a tribal community in northern Michigan. If you're from Michigan, you got to use your hand. So we're the pinky. The entire peninsula of northern Michigan is where I live. That's my county. The reservation is a patchwork reservation, so there's tribal land in Leelanau County as well as other counties around it, which presents some issues. I grew up in that area. That's where I'm originally from. So from a very early age, I went to school with and lived with the Native American community. And what I found quickly is their description of family and their thinking of family is much broader than most. So topics like this, where we're discussing elders, which the tribal communities think of elders as sacred to begin with, but then talking about from a family perspective, being able to address some of our needs is terribly important. The tribal communities suffer from high per capita violence against women, substance abuse disorders, just a number of big issues, not to mention the generational stress that was incurred by the removals and boarding schools, and I could go on and on and on. But what that's led to is a family setting that has its own normal dysfunction, but then also has these elders that are on the tail end, or at least getting to the point where they were part of that group that was removed and placed in boarding schools. So part of what I had to do was work within the community and gain trust, which I've done after 20-some years, but also be a good listener and understand. Our court focuses on restorative justice. We just started a family healing to wellness court, and the reason for looking at it from that perspective is understanding that even though the child may be acting out, or the parent has a substance abuse disorder, or the elder is in need, we really have to attack it from a family perspective and flood it with services so that you not only address the big issue, but you try and help support the side issues. Because otherwise what happens is you fix the one issue, and then the finger isn't in the right spot and the water squirts out and you're dealing with another issue. It's been, I've been honored to work there. It is at times very depressing, but I can tell you that anytime I sit down with a group like this and we talk about ideas, I'm really hopeful. This tribal community has gaming, so there is money available. They still rely quite heavily on BIA funds, so there's this ebb and flow of programming. But I think that overall, while there is a high focus on elders, we could always do better, and I think that's something that everybody can agree with. We can always do better, and we need to do better for them. So I'm hopeful out of today comes some new ideas I could take back with me, as well as some new ideas maybe from a policy standpoint that we can implement.
Well, and I think that everyone too can learn from you. That's a very humble thing to say, but this idea of a family wellness court and looking at, I always say if you fix one part of a dysfunctional system, you don't fix the system, you just fix one part, right? And so that you're trying to look at it from a holistic view. But once you start to peel back those layers of the onion, it can really bring up things that you're not expecting, right? So it takes a lot of patience as a judge, and also may change your role somewhat. You know, we know that from drug courts and mental health courts and problem-solving courts, that the role of a judge has shifted as we start to look at, you know, the criminal justice system in a more holistic manner. So I think we can learn from you too, Judge.
Great, I hope so.
Thank you. Judge Morley. So Judge Morley is from a rural, is that fair? A rural part of Florida. And she had a private practice. There's a large retirement, or there's an elderly population, and so she became passionate about this issue in her private practice, but has been on the bench since 2007 and handles elder justice cases, including incapacity, guardianship, and probate type cases.
So from the Sunshine State, thank you for inviting me and for hosting this forum. Thank you, Judge Sullivan and Andy and Amber and Amanda and those who were also involved behind the scenes. And thank you all for attending and bringing your questions and your comments, because I think we're all here for the same reason. We all have a passion not only for justice, but also for caring about this vulnerable population. In 2013, I was a board member for the Florida chapter of the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, and we were approached by a lady whose name is Linda Fieldstone, who's probably listening to our live stream, about an idea that she had because she had worked with families in the court system for over 20 years. And she saw that we had remedies for families that were dealing with custody issues and child-related issues, but she also saw that there were families that were on the other end of the age spectrum also struggling with family conflict. And there were no alternative dispute resolution processes available to those families, and there was no mechanism to make the aging person in the family the center of everybody's attention when they needed them the most. And she proposed to the board that parenting coordination, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that process, but that it be adapted for families at the other end of the age spectrum. So she proposed that it be called Elder Caring Coordination, and Elder Caring Coordination got some legs and began piloting sites in 2015. And I co-chaired with her the formation of a task force to study with a group of national and statewide organizations and agencies that dealt and continue to deal day in and day out with issues related to families who are in the courts and with elders. The Office of Violence Against Women was part of that. the AARP, the Association for the Advancement of Retired People, American Association, thank you. Several universities were part of the group, and for 2 years we worked together to develop what this process should look like. Who should be qualified to become elder caring coordinators? What training should they have? What research should we do so that we could develop best practices for this process? The process is, as I mentioned, an alternative dispute resolution method to address family conflict, so that when we see families in court who are arguing with each other so much that they have to have a judge make the decision about whether mom should be in a nursing home or be cared for in her own home, they are given the tools and taught the skills to negotiate and communicate more effectively with each other, put their conflict aside, and focus on that aging loved one who needs them now and doesn't need to be the referee in their conflict, but needs to be kept safe and to see their family getting along. Now, if they don't get along when the process is over, you know, that's too bad, but at least for the sake of that aging person, come together, make the decisions that that person needs to make. Let's develop a plan so that as the aging person transitions to needing higher levels of care, we know it's the reverse with children. They age out of needing care and dependency, but aging people have transitions to needing more and more care and becoming more and more dependent on their loved ones. So let's develop a plan so that we don't have to go to court in a public forum and blame each other and be hostile to each other and divide the family further. But let's focus instead on our strengths and what we can do in the future and how we can keep this loved one safe and how we can plan to avoid being in the middle of arguments when they're around and bring them the services that they need and let them age in peace. In their final days or months or years, whatever it turns out to be, let them have peace. So that is my passion. And we have piloted elder caring coordination in 8 different sites in Florida. We get nothing but positive feedback about, I can finally see my children because one of them had been keeping the others away or isolating me. I had one case where a mother had been gone for 2 years, meaning 2 of her children had sequestered her and not let the other 2 children know where she was, and she had Alzheimer's disease. And when they finally found out where she was and they came to court and were able to visit with her, she lived 4 more months. And she was so proud of her children. They were all professionals. She loved every one of them equally, and she wanted to see all 4 of her children, not just the 2 that were isolating her. I could go on with other stories, but we also piloted in Ohio, Minnesota. We're just bringing Maryland on board. California is coming on board. We're going to Toronto. We spoke to Australia in April about bringing elder caring coordination there. And we hope to bring more peace to more families and to more elders in their latter years.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. What great programs, and the fact that they're spreading. They're spreading because you go and help train. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you teach and explain how this process works. I think it's a very noble. Many people in this room think it's a very noble goal to have, peaceful families, and so that's great. Tough work. Thank you for being here. And we're going to finish up our introductions with Judge Cook. Judge Cook is one of us. He went to George Washington University Law School, which I didn't tell him, so did I. And so did our Attorney General. I just want to throw that out there. Also is a GW grad. And I want to also indicate that Judge Koch was a assistant U.S. attorney. So he used to be here with the Department of Justice and then returned to Minneapolis, has a very esteemed military career and private practice, and has done all kinds of incredibly amazing things. Go ahead.
Okay, my wife's number, if you want to call her and tell her these things, I can give it to you. As was mentioned, I'm Bill Cook. I'm from Minnesota. I just met these folks through this program, but it really is kind of neat to talk and exchange ideas about things that are happening around the country. I come at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm on the criminal side of the house. And so all of the guardianships and things like that, and the probate work, the coordination committees and things, I think are great, obviously. That's not where my focus has been. Just to give you a little perspective, Los Angeles County has a population of 10 million. Minnesota, the entire state, has a population of about 5.6 million. So our entire state is half the population of Los Angeles County. We have about a 20% elderly population over 65, so about 1 million. About 10% of those, or 100,000, are in some sort of assisted living or getting care in their home or in another setting. So we start down to about 100,000. Of that, we have about 4,500 different ways that people can get services from others. As advanced and progressive as Minnesota, I think in many ways is, what we found out, well, there was kind of a curtain pulled back in 2017 when our largest newspaper in the state, the Star Tribune, ran a series of 5 articles over a period of time. And it was something that was eye-opening for everyone. It was akin to basically looking at child protection and saying where holes are in child protection, but putting the focus on the other end of the spectrum and looking at elder care. And there are horrific stories. I mean, just horrific stories. And none of us want that to happen to us, and we don't want it to happen to a loved one. And we'd like to think that when we put someone in an assisted living facility, a nursing home, housing with services, we have like 5 different categories of kind of out-of-home placements for care. You want to believe that they're all licensed, they're all trained, they're all looking out for the best interests of your loved one. You'd like to think that the federal requirements that they might fall under about mandatory reporting actually is followed, and that when the mandatory report is made, there's actually follow-up. What this series of reports indicated, though, is that what we all would want to be in place wasn't necessarily in place. And even in progressive Minnesota, we did not license assisted living facilities. That was about 1,500 facilities that had no licensing requirements. As a result of that work, and the fact that it became kind of a central point of our U.S. senatorial race, our legislature and governor just a few weeks ago signed into law new legislation that will make all the assisted living facilities under a licensing regimen. It's a 4-phase project. There's all kinds of different things that are worked into that. There was a task force done in the state and it came up with 23 recommendations. Among them dealt with retaliatory evictions, because what was happening was if a family member or someone getting care made a complaint, it was very easy for the facility to just say, bye. And getting housing is something that is hard when you need care. And it's not something that you're always equipped to try to go and find on your own. And so it's looking at things like eviction protection and things of that nature. In Minnesota, we have 87 different counties. We have 10 judicial districts. I'm in Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis and the suburbs, so we're the largest kind of concentration of judicial resources. But even within Hennepin County, where we have relative wealth for services and things, we were falling short. And what we found was the reports that were being made were not being investigated. So we have 100,000 elderly who are receiving care in facilities. We have over 25,000 complaints filed every year. Now, this is not like criminal complaints. This is neglect. There are so many different definitions of the same terms used across various jurisdictions that it's hard to kind of track what abuse might be if someone might not be abuse in another jurisdiction, what neglect might be in one place might not be neglect in another. But out of that 25,000 complaints that was filed, so that's like 400 a week, or over 400 a week, only about 1,500 were being investigated. So you're talking less than a month's worth of complaints being investigated. And when you had to get investigations by statute or other regulations done within, say, 2 months or 6 months, they weren't being done. And family members weren't involved in the process. They weren't even notified in many situations that their loved one was abused or taken advantage of. And so the news reporting around that generated a lot of discussion, and it generated a lot of kind of hot water for legislators and for others to kind of step up and do some work there. So I think it's great, all the positive things that are out there that people are working toward. But when it comes to actual boots on the ground investigating, I think that's going to be important, whether it's a CPA doing financial work or whether it's trained investigators, law enforcement folks who take the matter seriously when they come in. And they don't just say, well, you know, she kind of makes complaints about everyone, so this is probably just her thing. Is actually following up and knowing how to talk with someone who might have some diminished recall. I was talking with one of our prosecutors in Hennepin County, which is the Minneapolis area, and she likened the situation right now to where kind of sexual abuse was about 20 years ago, where you didn't have people who were really trained to take the reports. You didn't have people really trained to follow up and know where to look for information, and that we really need to do the education and the prioritization of it, because we're, as was said, we're all hopefully getting older. In Minnesota, if you reach 65, odds are you're going to make it to 85. We have the second longest longevity projected lifespan of any in the country. Hawaii beats us by 2 months. So either you get it from the sun or you get it from the cold. But we, I just want to make sure that everyone who reaches that milestone can feel comfortable they're going to be taken care of.
Thank you so much, Judge Cook. That's very interesting. I have a friend whose grandfather just died in Minneapolis, and he was 107, I think. So, yeah. Anyway, something like that. Okay, so I am going to freak Andy Mao out right away, and I am going to go off script. No, I do want to just bring up this point, though, in listening to everyone, and I've had the benefit of reading your bios and some of your extended questions and everything. Would you sort of look at guardianship cases oftentimes are akin to handling a divorce case? I mean, is that a fair representation to make? I mean, I understand the issues are different, but you're dealing with, you know, they can be that high conflict. Like, we think of divorces, right? And we think of how high conflict a divorce can become. Is that, can the conflict rise to that level in guardianships?
Thank you for that question, Judge Sullivan. Yes, absolutely. And remember, in divorce situations, a couple has been together for a certain number of years. However, in these cases, the family has been together all their lives. And so sometimes you have a case where mom always liked you better, and now that friction in that relationship comes home to roost. And when we have to make decisions for mom, we can't even look at each other, never mind agree on what decision needs to be made. Or mom has remarried and we never liked stepdad. Now mom is losing her capacity to make decisions for herself, and thus the incapacity and guardianship are filed. Because now stepdad rather, is making the decisions. We never liked him to begin with. Now he's making decisions for mom, and we really don't like him, and it's on. And it gets very low, unfortunately, and a lot of hitting below the belt. And the years of resentment and the years of friction really boil over, and they do become very high conflict, much like divorce cases, and maybe worse, probably worse.
I'm just creating sort of a vision to give the idea of, I don't know, I'd never thought of it that way until I started reading about, you know, some of the work you guys are doing and the issues that you identified. Yes, go ahead.
So, we all recognize that families are the core structure of our society. And so where that exemplifies or exhibits itself is the beginning of life, middle range, all through life. So of course, guardianships are integral to that component of the spectrum of our existence and the spectrum of the existence of our core societal structure. And because of that, we do have to recognize that at that end and that phase of life, we do know that that family is still probably the most significant and important component of the protected person who is in front of us than anyone else in our environment. And in our court, we've looked to that to impose, like our custody cases, mandatory mediation for all contested cases to maintain the dignity and privacy of the family, the dignity and respect for the protected person or proposed protected person, and to reach a written resolution that resolves sibling concerns, that resolves parental need and whether or not that exists, and that respects and maintains the civil rights of the proposed protected person to the maximum capacity. So it is a part of family, it's the back end of family, and we do have contentious issues, but we can also resolve, and I loved what Judge said about peaceful existence in the final years of lives. We need that peaceful existence, we need those peaceful memories of our protected person, and so it absolutely is a family law case.
Are your just a quick question, are your mediators specially trained?
So we've trained a group of about 20 mediators. We've included legal services providers, if that's appropriate. We've included our neighborhood mediation services. We've included professional mediators. And we've had a specialized training with a certification. I will say that cases and attorneys gravitate to one or the other based on kind of identified talents. And attorneys and litigants now start mediating their own case up front once they know that they're going to mandatory mediation. So alternative dispute resolution, which in Nevada is a statutory mandate for the Judiciary and Family Court, we must identify alternative dispute resolution. It's a protocol now in our guardianship court.
Judge Yuhas?
So I don't even think you have to go all the way to guardianship. I think you can look at domestic violence restraining orders as elder abuse restraining orders, and the same thing, that they can be equally as devastating. If you've got a family caregiver that's now been kicked out of the house, that now has to find other places to live perhaps, which means maybe another family caregiver is going to have to upend their life to move in and take over. So, well, I think guardianships certainly do, but I think you can expand it into all areas where abuse is manifest, including restraining orders. I also want to just very quickly say that, there's a lot of people that come into court self-represented as well. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that we're addressing that because, well, you may have capacity issues and whatnot with the elder. If you've got, the daughter or the son coming into court seeking a restraining order, you've now got a self-represented party that has a different set of laws to navigate. So it can be equally as devastating on the family piece and equally as devastating on the family, whether it's a guardianship, or just a restraining order.
So a legal assistance type of program would be focused on elder justice would be very helpful, is what I hear you saying.
I think legal aid, helping in that regard would be fabulous. I think having navigators like they've been working with in New York for elders would be great. Getting a cadre of retired folks that have time that want to come in and volunteer in the court would be fantastic. I think there's a lot of different ways to get there, but yeah, some kind of I hate the phrase non-lawyer, but I'm going to use it anyway, non-legally trained person. Mm-hmm. I heard it recently described as someone that doesn't have a lot of debt. Having someone come in that's not necessarily has a JD.
Judge Sullivan, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to remind everybody that sometimes the children that are being asked to take care of the elder are children that the elder had abused at one time too. Right. So that not only creates some concern about the care the elder receives, but it also creates more conflict in the family. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Again, the laws are different in different jurisdictions, and in New Jersey, one of the reasons why I love this calendar is because I have a I have a lot more autonomy and an ability to resolve issues like high conflict guardianship cases. I mean, I can remember sitting on the bench and in custody cases and coming out and, you know, I didn't like the two choices in front of me, so I was looking for the pack of wolves to put that child with. But I only had those two choices, so it was like least detrimental. In guardianship cases in New Jersey, I don't have to, if I have two siblings that are fighting over custody of mom, I think that it's going to be really detrimental to the ward, then I don't have to choose one of them. I don't have to choose a family member. I don't have to choose a friend. I can appoint a professional to be the guardian in those cases, or an agency. And they often, the guardians that are professionals are people who are very experienced in elder law, and I find that they act as mediators or arbitrators on things like visitation with mom and who mom is going to live with. And they are able to resolve those, and so that mom can have a good relationship with both of her children, because it's if there's such high conflict between cases. And the other issue the other time that arises is if you have adult children from a first marriage. And it's very sad. I just had a case that had a husband and wife. They had gone into assisted living. The husband, she had physical problems, but he had Alzheimer's and was combative. And so the home, the assisted living facility wanted him to leave. When he was forced to leave the facility and go back to the home that they owned, adult son came in and would let the wife to know where the father was, and it's still going on. But again, that was a case in which I mean, he was treating her as if she was the other woman, and it was, I mean, they had been married for 35 years. The only reason that they were separated, I mean, the son went to the extent of putting a picture of his mom next to the bed in the facility that he had put dad in. Very sad cases. So those are the cases that I'm happy that I'm able to have another alternative and get an experienced attorney who can come in and act as a mediator in those cases so that they could have contact. Yeah.
Did you have something, Judge Cook?
I just wanted to point out, I don't practice in the probate conservatorship area, but I did speak with our judge who primarily handles that almost full time. And something that she had mentioned to me is a concern that she has that with the guardianships and conservators, even if you go outside the family to professionals, you really need to make sure that the court system is auditing who you're using and what they're doing. We unfortunately, it seems like when there's spot audits done, the problems are always bigger than you'd expect. And that just means you need to be auditing more generally and more uniformly across the board. And so every solution has its own internal problems, and you need to think proactively about where those are and how you can help capture those to minimize them. And so that was just something that she brought up to me, that she wishes that there was more money for auditing, for follow-up, and kind of a post hoc forensic accounting of where things went.
Thank you. Let me move, because we've talked a lot about guardianship, but I know that this, in your notes that you sent, were concerns across the board, and we can certainly circle back. But I think the audience would like to hear a little bit too about the financial exploitation. Is that, I can ask, like, how many civil and or criminal cases have you presided over, and sort of what form are the cases? Does that seem to be prevalent
Well, I can start the discussion maybe. We have a Minnesota Sentencing Guideline Commission, which records every statute and how the offenses come down and everything. And I also talked with our county attorney's office, which handles all the felony offenses in the county. The vast majority of the criminal cases that are filed are financial exploitation. And perhaps it's because they're easy to prove just because of the paper trail that's out there. If you know where to look, you can find the forged checks. You can find where the payments are going. And so in many ways, it's a kind of a typical fraud case. In Minnesota, we had, from 2010 to 2017, we had 155 cases that were brought. Actually, I'm sorry, I read the number wrong. 196 cases that were brought, and 155 of those were more financial exploitation type cases. And the vast majority of those cases were people who had no criminal record. So on our sentencing guidelines that we use, it's just a grid that looks at criminal history and the nature of the offense, the vast majority were looking at probationary sentences. The vast majority were family members, but there were some, you would call them strangers, but mainly, I just had one that was a stranger financial exploitation, but it was someone from the person's church who the church had sent out to say, she'll help you with your finances. And she befriended the woman and then ended up writing checks totaling about $30,000 or so. And when we had the trial, we brought in the 97-year-old, at the time, alleged victim, but the jury convicted, so I can say victim. She was very frail. It was hard to hear her. That sounds like it should be a little problem, but like we had a mic right up to her mouth and you could hardly hear her. She was so soft-spoken. She was sharp as a tack, but physically she wasn't. And it was interesting from a judicial perspective, just watching how the parties approached it. And the defense attorney's main tact, he did it in a respectful way, but it was really, ma'am, how many people have stolen from you this year? And she said, 7 or 6, I guess it was. And he said, well, didn't you say 7 people stole from you? And she said, well, 6 did. And then he got into like the minutia, and it was kind of like, okay, is this a paranoid individual who everybody she sees, she's a victim of all of them, or has she really been taken advantage of that many different times? And so we spent a lot of time, of jury time, going through things that, I mean, it was important, it was relevant, because it went to whether her perceptions were accurate, but at the end of the day, we had forged checks. Like, I mean, it wasn't really that constructive. But I do think that financial exploitation, at least in Minnesota, has been more the norm when it comes to criminal prosecutions, just because it's a more comfortable environment for a lot of prosecutors and investigators.
And I think Judge Block, yeah.
In the area of financial exploitation, that is probably one of the hardest areas to detect, unless a bank tells somebody that they are suspicious of funds going out of an account. Iowa is a little behind. Minnesota has state auditors that conservators have to report to, and it's like a tax return. You fill it out, and it goes to the auditors, and they audit like every 3 or 4 years and do spot audits if there's problems. In Iowa, we don't have that. I am the auditor. So I'm looking at all the reports. Not everybody does a good job with their reports. There's no uniformity. Across the state, you have a lot of volunteer conservators who really don't know what they're doing. Their attorneys don't educate them on what the processes are. They come into court, I want to be conservator of mom's assets. Do you know what your duties are? No. Has your attorney explained them to you? No. Have you read the code? No. Do you know you got to file an annual report? No. What's the annual report supposed to say? Well, every item of expense and income. So sometimes I catch them, and I see some variances in the reports from previous years, and it raises a red flag to me. That's one way, and I refer them to the county attorney for prosecution. Not all the banks do a good job of catching things. There's no mandatory reporting for a lot of states. The banks fight that like crazy. So the local family-owned banks who really care about their individuals probably will catch it from time to time and report to somebody. But your national banks typically don't get down into the weeds like that. So it goes on, and we catch a few, but there are a lot more going on than what you would ever think is going on. And a lot of the rationale is mom or dad are going to go into the nursing home. I might as well spend their money because I'm not going to inherit anything. The nursing home's going to take everything. So I want it now, and no one will catch me. And that's a lot of the mentality. And then they'll say, well, my mother or sister or whatever, they didn't care. They would want me to have this money. Or they want me to go spend this money on that expense. So they're justifying what they did wasn't wrong. And one of the inept things that bothers me is detectives will say it's a family issue. We don't want to get involved. They don't want to get involved with the red tape and paperwork. It's a lot easier to pull over a drunk driver than it is to go answer a family dispute about someone spending someone else's money. And then you have the judicial branch, unfortunately. You have prosecutors that may want to prosecute it, but then you have judges who just say, well, this person's old, we can't put them in jail. There's no chance of rehabbing them. They're going to die eventually anyway, and they let them off. So detectives and prosecutors say, well, we did our work, and then the judicial branch let them go. So what are we supposed to do? And to me, it's sending people a message that this is against the law. You can't take advantage of people. And we all need to take it serious to know that we're going to do something about it. And that's one of the things that I try to do. And it's the poor and it's the rich. There is no segregation of, we only pick on these people. I've had multimillionaire people who have been victims, and I've had people who don't have anything other than their Social Security check. And you have caregivers who take advantage of them. You have family members. And then you have the scammers, the professional scammers that pry on these people. And most of these people are dementia of some sort, or they don't want to hurt their family, and so they're not going to say anything bad about their family members. And it makes it hard to prosecute if family doesn't want to testify against family. So it's a big issue. I don't know what the solution is, but the states that have an accounting system are ahead of the game. That's one tool in order to do that. But in Iowa, I fought for it with the judicial branch, and they say there's no money in the budget. So we're not going to require that type of a system, which is unfortunate.
Judge Rowe, I'm very interested to know what happens if the CPAs that work with your surrogate court, if they see this. I mean, it's what happens.
We have had a number of prosecutions as a result of our CPAs that reviewing accountings. One in particular was a woman that had been appointed by the court on a regular basis. When the CPA was brought on board and started looking at her accountings and realized that she had a number of different guardianships and had them. We started to notice that she was always placing them in the same nursing home and her wards, and the accountings didn't add up. Not only was she stealing liquid assets, bank accounts, but she was also stealing these jewelry from these very vulnerable wards that she had placed in the nursing home. She was prosecuted. I believe they gave her what's called pretrial intervention, PTI. However, she was disbarred also, and of course, removed from all of her guardianships. Another one was actually a minister who was also had a degree in social work, and he was getting named as the guardian in a number of his clients' and parishioners' cases. Again, the countings didn't add up, and he also was prosecuted. But there's a lot of challenge to these, as the judge had indicated. Scammers, to convince an alleged incapacitated or adjudicated incapacitated person that that their child is stealing from them. Well, first of all, they don't believe you. Secondly, the scammers, they're very good at befriending these elderly people who are very lonely. So it becomes a problem in terms of prosecution, and I think the biggest thing is that the attitude of particularly law enforcement, and I keep referring these cases to the prosecutor when there's admissions of misappropriation of funds to the prosecutor, but the attitude is, just as the judge said, is well, they're going to get it anyway. They're going to inherit this anyway. Well, besides the fact that it's against the law, so they think, well, what's the difference? Here's the difference: is I find that there's financial exploitation. I have to appoint an agency or an independent attorney, and that's at the taxpayer's cost. And so there is a reason, and the Medicaid fraud, I mean, really, they need to prosecute these, and it has to be from, it has to be from the top down. It really, they have to take these cases seriously. They're good on the big fish cases that are very high profile, like on the attorneys or somebody who's well known in the community, because it makes great headlines. But when it comes to a family member, and that's the majority of the cases, or these small-time scammers.
Oh, interesting. How about that? Yes. Judge Lund.
One of the issues that it took a while to kind of bring out is that many elders, if faced with the decision of going to assisted living or being taken advantage of at home, will stay at home. This is their home. It's been generational sometimes. They know the person staying with them is taking advantage of them. I mean, they get it, but that's the price they're willing to pay. So I do think there's got to be somewhat of a focus on giving options to the elders that, number one, they can afford, but number two, they don't feel as though they're losing that independence. It's, for me anyways, it's far easier sending someone to jail than it is removing them from their home. It just is. So I think if we look to other options that maybe we're not as, from their perspective, from the elders' perspective, as restrictive and as more of a transition rather than I've just left my home and I'll never return, there may be more of a willingness to speak out when these things are happening.
I have to say, and this leads us a little bit, the only last question I do want to ask about the financial exploitation, I think this is more Department of Justice kind of area, but it's the phone scams. Those are, I mean, I get those and I'm terrified, like, oh my God, I'm about to be arrested. No, but I mean, that's really, they're pretty intense. And for a lonely person, I think, I do always think about the elderly. My grandmother fell into that a little bit, where she would just want to talk to someone, and so it could be effective. Do you guys see that at a state court level, or is that handled? I know we talked about it a little bit in Iowa when we were there, so.
Give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I had a couple. The wife has terminal illness, and the husband is has frontal dementia. And he knows his wife is going to die, so he put an ad on Facebook saying, my wife is going to die, I'm looking for a lady who will want to live with me when she dies. And he got numerous hits, and some lady from Nigeria answered his plea, and if you send me this money, I'll be your new wife. And he kept sending money to her overseas because he wanted someone to care for him when his wife dies. And I had another lady, very wealthy, has real no immediate family, and she fell victim to a scammer who would call her on the phone every week, and he would talk to her for a half hour, and she would send him money, because he'd plead for the money after they got done talking. And when we asked the lady, you know, why do you do this? I'm lonely, and he will talk to me. And it's worth to me to give him money for someone to talk to me. So you see that side of it, and then you see the professional scammers who have sent pizza delivery guys to the door to collect money. They use other people to pass money on, so money's coming in from out of state, going into someone's bank account, and then they're passing it on. They become the mule, like you've read about and heard about. Mostly those people are out of country, and they're very hard to prosecute because you can't get to the source of where they're from. But and then the grandchild calling saying, your grandchild's in jail and he needs to post bond, send a check, you know, and the elderly person, well, I had a case where her husband went to the hospital for surgery, she's home, someone must have knew that, and they called her and said, your grandchild's in jail, needs $5,000. She really wasn't thinking things through, and she sent $5,000 because she felt sorry for her grandson, didn't think about asking questions. So that, I mean, that stuff goes on every day, and it's sad to hear about it, but it's reality.
When it comes to training with all these cases, whether it's the case that can be proven or not, we need to be trained on how to get the money back. Whether it's the grandson who has an opioid addiction, or it's the contractor who wasn't licensed and you didn't need a new roof, but now you have a Mickey Mouse roof and you're paying, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars for something you didn't need. Whatever it is, we need ways to get the money back. I mean, the people that are taking it, we call them judgment proof because they have nothing we can go against, but let's find a way to get that money back. If it's $10 a week or it's, you know, $1,000 a week, it's all that these older people have. And in these guardianship cases, the first thing that the elder person or disabled person says is they just want my money, because money is our independence. I mean, if you think about it, how would you like to not be able to put $1 in your pocket when you leave the house?
Yeah.
And when their money is taken or a guardianship is imposed and somebody else is controlling their money, that is their independence and their sense of self.
Yeah.
So anyway, get the money back.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's lead into protection orders. I know just even sitting here and remembering some of the cases that I presided over, some of the most heartbreaking were the ones in which a parent, elderly parent, came in to ask for a protection order against a child. Those were just heartbreaking, oftentimes because the child was drug addicted and, you know, they had been getting some counseling and being coached up and things like that, but then they would show up in court and not really want them, and it was really awful. So how do you guys see a lot of that? I don't know who would like to start. Judge Doherty? I mean, yep.
So historically, we have seen those cases, and they're reminiscent of domestic violence cases in general. They're reminiscent of what we did at this level and at local levels to address domestic violence 30 and 40 years ago. And that is to not treat the victim as the sole source of potential prosecutorial merit, because the families and the elderly in particular will drop their TPO more likely than not, if they even come to court. There's such a tiny percentage of people who are abused by their family members who are elderly who will come to court in the first place for any reason, but certainly for a protective order. And even in the first hearing, they're talking about dropping the protective order. Even in that preliminary hearing, they're already regretting. So some advocate or maybe some social worker or someone from the Department on Aging has gotten the person there. They're bruised on their arms, they're bruised on their necks. And the guilt is already setting in that the son in the home who is unemployed is one of many different scenarios. will now be kicked out of the house, doesn't have resources, has been living off of mom's very small income. And these are real situations. I'm not sure how far any of us have to look, professionally or even personally, to look at our world around us to see how many people may be taken advantage of. And so do we have a no-drop policy for the elderly? I would suggest that most prosecutorial environments don't have a no-drop policy for prosecution of the elderly. Do we have the wraparound support, safety, and dignity preservations for that person that will assist them in going forward? Because kicking your only child, and oftentimes that is an adult child who has had learning disabilities all of his or her life, or other challenges that mother has parented for 40, 50, 60 years. That is the child that she is going to protect until she or he dies, depending on the parent. So the dynamics are so difficult, but I have to tell you, as we sit here today as judges, we react. We react to abuse. We react to the request placed in front of us. This is a rare occasion that we can talk about being proactive, where we can leave our benches and say, this is not only the work we do, this is the help that we need. Because if we think that the courts can protect those who are vulnerable and elderly without significant partnerships with prosecution, without significant partnerships with law enforcement, we have to be uncomfortable about this topic, because this is very uncomfortable. And when we, going back to guardianship court, think, well, they have a guardianship, the court monitors, the court reads those reports, it's absurd to think that the court can be so comprehensively protective of these vulnerable individuals that we, without you as partners, can really successfully address this issue. And so in domestic violence, it continues. I've been working decades in this field, starting with domestic violence, then sexual assault, and then elder abuse. It's just a continuum of vulnerable people who we have to recognize have peculiar needs and vulnerabilities that must be addressed in our various communities. And that's where this issue goes, and it's such a, it's so perfectly poignant that we're sitting with the VAWA assistant and in the Department of Justice, because this is really where all the knowledge started on how to protect vulnerable persons. And this is where the knowledge needs to be created. There's a new generation of you who really have to pick up this issue from us and figure out how to prosecute these cases, and figure out how to protect those isolated individuals, and figure out how to prosecute those fraudulent scammers and manipulators. And that's really why we're here. We need you as our partners, because we, in this wealth of knowledge, we are not doing a sufficient job. And it's horrible to feel that way. And we're just catching up, and we never really will without you.
And Judge Long, I would be interested to hear, with your holistic view and the restorative justice approach, if you've had a case where there's someone, an elderly person who's being abused, how would that be addressed through your holistic model? Because I kind of see the holistic model as an idea of what Judge Doherty is saying, which is that we have to look at this at 360 degrees. The judges can't solve it, prosecutors can't solve it. You know, we know that protection orders can't solve it. I'm totally there. I've never saw one go past a temporary order, and so.
It's difficult because I think you've got to understand your limitations, and many times, although you remove someone from the home and you create the safety net for the elder, they want that relationship with the other individual. So what we've tried to do is, and there are a few people who prey upon the elderly that are just bad eggs. I mean, they're as dysfunctional as they come. They cannot be fixed, and you must simply isolate them. The majority of people have something causing, some causation to the mistreatment or the, taking from the elder. So what we see, for example, is someone's stealing from the elder because they have a substance abuse disorder, or they're mentally ill and they're not on their meds. Those types of cases, again, when you take the holistic approach, you're going to treat the family, treat the individual. You've got to protect the elder while the individual's recovering or is getting better. But what I've found is if we don't try that, they're coming back in anyways.
Yep.
So at least if you try it with supervision in place and the services in place, and if it works, great. Hopefully you never see them again. But if it doesn't work, you're right away in there and you're able to pull them back out. Because I talked about that sense of family. With it comes a willingness to forgive. So some of the things that you might not be able to forgive, tribal communities will. And I can't impose my own thoughts on what they should or should not do, but I merely have to keep them safe and give them the time to recover. Hopefully bring them back into the family, but if it can't happen, then we've got to make some long-term plans.
And to just jump onto that, and another topic that I know we wanted to talk about, which is opioid and all substance abuse. I mean, I know it's not just opioids, but how do we see that affecting the elderly and families? Judge Morley?
In my jurisdiction, I see it on a few different levels. We have a very large retirement population, even though I'm in a rural community. We have a big subdivision that's for retirees, and we see people who have had pain issues and become addicted and, believe it or not, turn to street drugs because they're cheaper than what the doctor prescribes. So that affects the elderly, and then they are exploited by their dealers. We also have grandparents raising their grandchildren because the children's parents are opioid addicted or having problems with substances. And then we have the children or grandchildren who are stealing from their aging loved one to support their habits. We face the same situation that we spoke of earlier, where the grandparent just wants that person to get the help they need and doesn't want them prosecuted, wants them to get treatment. And although they'll cooperate to the extent that they will report it, they won't cooperate to the extent of any criminal prosecution. And if they seek an injunction for protection of any kind, they will drop it. My people, believe it or not, come to court and tell me they're dropping it, but they still beg and plead with me to enter some order requiring the perpetrator to get some help. And go ahead.
And of course, there's no hook with that. I mean, if the protection order is dropped, you no longer have jurisdiction for that to have any real effect.
Right.
So it's like a false promise, I guess. Judge Yuhas, I'm guessing in Los Angeles County you see this issue.
Yes.
And we know too that your county is struggling with a homelessness problem. We've been reading about that in the LA Times, and so all those issues, how are they affecting the elderly?
So I think that I wasn't here 25 or 30 years ago, but I'm guessing that this discussion is much like the discussion that was happening around domestic violence with the person wants to stay, the person just wants the violence to stop, wants the relationship to continue. The concept that proving a financial exploitation is easy is true if you've got legal help and accounting help and all that. It's much more difficult if you're self-represented. I think that the areas where the restraining orders come into play requires a lot more finesse and a lot more help from advocates and that sort of thing. What are the options that are available? Letting courts know what the options that are available are. What can you do? Where do you go? All of those sorts of things, I think, become important. When that elder comes into court and wants to drop a civil restraining order, there's not a lot I can do except suggest perhaps that's not a great idea. But I think we're kind of stuck with that because it's a civil So a no-drop policy doesn't work in my civil courtroom. To answer the question about homelessness, I think that we are struggling in Los Angeles with significant homelessness. I think that, specialty courts that become, that allow judges to become a much more aware of the subtleties and the ins and outs and whatnot of the homeless, I think become very helpful. We have a couple of homeless courts that, as I understand it, are doing truly good work. I'm not aware, it's possible, but I'm not aware that there is an increase in restraining orders as a result of homelessness in the elderly, just as a result of homelessness.
Yeah, interesting. Anyone else on substance use and how it's affecting your elderly?
Just on the homeless issue, it's not easy, that's the wrong word. There are at least available shelters for young people who are victims or survivors of abuse, interpersonal violence of any kind. But when you need care and you're older, there's no shelter to go to. Mm-hmm. And so they continue the relationship with the abuser, having no other choice.
A common threat is if you turn me in, I'm going to kick you out. You're going to go to a nursing home. You're going to become homeless. You're going to, and so that's a common threat to keep someone there. The immigration issue also. If you turn me in, I'm going to use the vernacular, rat you out to the immigration authorities. I mean, all those threats are used to keep someone in that, and the fear of, I don't want to go to a nursing home or a SNF. I don't want to do that. Is a very effective threat.
And I'll mention also the LGBTQ community. They don't want to go into any kind of an assisted living or nursing home environment. They want to be cared for at home because, their generation didn't accept their lifestyle when they were younger, and if they end up in institutional care, they go back in the closet, as we used to say. It's very sad.
Yeah. It's the image or the vision that I'm getting is what is how costly just having some company and maybe staying in the home where having a roof over your head, how costly that becomes for much of our elderly population, like the cost benefit. As Judge Block was saying, for a half an hour phone conversation once a week, somebody said, look, it's worth sending some money so I know that I have that phone call. And so, when you start to look at what the cost benefit analysis, and that's what it sounds like this entire panel would like to see change, right? What you would like to see is that, you don't have to, that our elderly don't have to sell out for such little, right? So little. And so how do we do that? And I think that's what the audience is for. Our wonderful federal employees are here to figure it out in one day. Okay, so that's not going to happen. Okay, but no, this is really good. All right, so coordinated community responses, because I think, how much time do we have? We have about a half an hour. Oh, geez. Oh, Andy, here I go. Did we have any audience questions before I move on to solution? Because Andy will come pick them up. Now's the time. But I think we've painted and really identified a lot of gaps, a lot of issues. I like to end with some positive note, right? So I think we've heard what's been working. I think the CPA idea, I just cannot imagine that everybody doesn't go back and start to figure that out, right? Yeah.
I have one other issue that I'm very much an advocate of, is bonding requirements also for the guardians, for two reasons. One,
Can you explain bonding requirements,
okay,
please?
bonding requirements is just like if you were having a construction project, you would have to get bonding. It's basically like insurance, that the fiduciary is going to, do their job, they're not going to steal, and then there's this money that's available to make the person whole.
So a conservator might put $5,000 like up for bond.
Well, the way that it works is I get an inventory of the person's assets, and then I set the bond based on the amount of assets that they have. So it can be millions of dollars, and the cost for the bond can be also very expensive. But the reason that I mention that is that we have an option as judges whether or not we're going to impose bond. I always impose bonds if there are assets available from the ward to protect them for two reasons. One, that those because there's a bonding requirement, then those cases would definitely be reviewed by our surrogate accountant. Two is with bonding requirements, somebody that has a bad criminal background will not be able to qualify for the bond. So it eliminates those people as well.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
When you have, can I just ask a question? When you have the bonding requirement, are there situations where the person seeking the protection of the court can waive that?
Yeah.
Because that's usually what we see, what I've seen.
No, the court can waive it. I can find, and I see that, I see a lot of judges in other counties doing that in New Jersey, is that they just waive the bond requirement because they think it's too burdensome or whatever reasons that they place upon the record. And I just think that's a mistake.
Well,
because there's no oversight then.
Yeah, what I've seen, and it's not as extensive as your experience, but it's especially when there's a family member that's going to be serving in that function, most people don't want to impose that burden on their family member, and so they'll waive the bonding requirement and not seek it. And so it's a matter of kind of approach of who determines whether or not a bond is required, and that sort of thing. I mean, it's an insurance policy, obviously.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, let me ask a couple of these questions, and then I want you all to think about what is the thing that's working the best. I would like to leave on that note. So yes, we hear you loud and clear that we're back in the dark ages on this, and we need to get into the light, people, and we are going to do that. And I know everyone in this room cares so deeply about this. So I do want to end with that. So you're all going to have about 30 seconds at the end, but there's some great questions here. So what types of training are available to judges on elder abuse or financial exploitation issues? And what training would you like to see for judges specifically? So we can just go right down the line. Judge Block?
I think the National Council of Judicial puts on an annual training. I attended one a couple years ago in Minneapolis. One of the things that I've been trying to push with our own judicial branch is when we have our continuing education judges conference, probate in this kind of area doesn't excite the trial judges, the criminal judges. They don't deal with it, so they kind of like put it on the side. I know when I'm gone and they bring in a judge to replace me, I hear from it from everybody who comes to my court. It's like, why did you go? When you coming back? Because your replacement doesn't know anything about what you're doing. So it's got to be an education from the judicial side. And one thing that I see among this group, and I wish more judges were like this, is the passion that you really care. Care about the individuals who are in your courtroom, care about the longevity of that issue. I've been in cases where trial judges say, I just hear the facts, I make a decision, and out the door you go, bring on the next case. I try to talk to everybody in my courtroom to tell them, I'm here because God put me in this position, and I can relay something that can help you and your family mend the fences and to move on with life. Then I've done my job to show that passion that I care about people. And to me, if we had more judges like this group who really care about people and want to make a difference in people's lives, we're kind of limited in what a judge can do. But my court reporter gets tired of hearing the story, and I'll end with this. My parents died at an early age, and I have kids come in who are fighting among themselves, fighting with their parents, and I tell them a story, I would give anything I could have to have my mother walk back through that courtroom and be alive, but I don't have that opportunity. Why do you want to spend the rest of your life with your parents fighting? Mend the fences. Once they die, if you don't want to get along with brother or sister, that's between the two of you. But why take it out on your elderly parent? Why should they have to see this and be a victim of your animosities or whatever you've had since childhood, whatever these people want to play out? And so I give them that little speech, and I tell them, when you go outside this courtroom, I expect the next time you come back, there's going to be a little more harmony.
Thank you, Judge Block. And then let's shake it up. Judge Cook, what kind of training? I'm going to go till we meet in the middle.
I've been just waiting.
I
to hear
know,
everyone
so
else.
go. What training is available and what do you need?
I think many jurisdictions will have annual training because it's cheaper if we do it in-house. than if
We do
go
ours
out and
in-house.
do things with others. And so we have twice a year.
Do you want to turn the mic on,
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry.
Because we're live
Okay, here we
streaming.
go.
Yeah.
Sorry. Like most jurisdictions, we have CLE requirements or CJE requirements, and we handle most of that through 2 conferences that we attend to throughout the year. We haven't yet had kind of an elder law track, if you will, during that, but we are just getting suggestions for our next go-round. So I think that that's something that can be approached, and although I'm a trial court judge, I care too. I think many of us do, but it's a matter of making it relevant to the court that the person's in. And I think most jurisdictions, the judges move around. And so, I was in family court for 3 years of the 11 or 12 years that I've been on the bench, but the rest have been in criminal. But there are aspects of every practice area that we might touch that touch on elder law or the vulnerable adult population being victimized. And so it's a matter of trying to identify that and knowing, I think, perhaps more importantly, is what are the resources available. And I don't want to be pessimistic, I really don't, but it seems like sometimes we all probably are guilty of this, but sometimes from a judge's perspective, it seems like I'm the only one that cares. And I'm sure from an advocate's perspective, you think sometimes you're the only one that cares or whatever. But I don't know all the resources that are out there that you all might be aware of. I don't know if there's a shelter that would take the elderly who are being victimized in a physical violence issue. I don't know what type of advocacy services are out there. So if there's better communication internally about what resources are available externally, it might make us be more creative in our solutions. So not every round peg, we're trying to force into a square hole. We can be more thoughtful.
Okay, so you are going to make sure that there is an elder abuse track
Yep, I wrote
in your
it- I wrote it
judicial
down.
conference
Yeah.
in Minnesota, and so that's good to know. Judge Doherty.
So I think
Training.
we do have some training available nationally. The ABA does a training, the National Council for Juvenile and Family Court Judges. But I think the most significant training needed is interdisciplinary training, where we're all talking to each other, where we connect the dots, and we come up with creative ways to holistically solve the problem. So that's where I think the unmet training need is.
Judge Morley.
Well, we need to train judges to recognize that older persons are not islands, but they have a family, and that they should be approached in that family unit and not in that individual capacity. I think we need to address, well, it's probably a prosecutorial question, these cases where the elders won't testify and how to pursue a case without their testimony. As I say, that's more of a prosecutorial issue, but there was a time when we had an uncooperative interpersonal violence victim that would be compelled to testify. Do we want to treat elders that way? We don't treat survivors of interpersonal violence that way anymore, but how do we bring how do we get teeth in the process? let me see, I had one other thing. Oh, how do we address underreporting? We need to train judges to recognize signs of abuse so that they can inquire further and suggest resources to the suspected victims of elder abuse.
Thank you so much. Judge Yuhas?
So the beauty of being at MySpace is a lot of the things I would have said have already been said, except I would add a couple of things. In California, we're very lucky. At the end of this month, we're going to have a training called Abuse in Later Life, which is a cross-discipline training. We have a
Is that for California judges only?
Yes.
Okay.
Modeled after the national curriculum.
Okay.
But we also have a bench guide, Effective Court Practice for Abused Elders. We have another bench guide, Abuse in Later Life, which I believe are Googleable. So they're out there. I think one thing that I would like to see us have are, just like we have bench cards in domestic violence for lethality and things of that nature, I think issue spotting bench cards for capacity and for financial abuse and for what do you look for sexual abuse and that sort of thing, which are issue spotting that when I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder whether that is, and then I can just simply do that. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, certainly. But I think that we're making some progress in the education area.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Judge Long?
I think the question of capacity is the big one I struggle with every day. So not only having a bench card, but also looking to standardize some of these tests for Native Americans. That's something that's far, far too long that we've had to deal with that. I am willing to take risks for individuals that want to remain independent, but there's that tipping point. I have to be able to look at myself the next day, and I struggle with that a lot because that independence issue, there's so many elders, when you remove them from their home, they do not do well. So if I'm going to make that decision, I want to know that's what I've got to do, and that's the right point to do it, and that would be really helpful.
Thank you so much. Judge Rowe?
Very briefly, our training is done in-house, and we do have courses at each of our judicial college, our civil conferences, as well as judges transfer into general equity or they're handling probate cases. We have a comprehensive judges orientation program, and I teach at some of those also. So I think we have enough in terms of the judicial education. That's not the issue. And periodically they bring other agencies in also to speak to the judges. But I agree with what's been said here mostly, that it has to be, what we need that interdisciplinary approach. We need the mental health professionals. We need the law enforcement, prosecutors, down to local law enforcement. We need any of the county programs for the seniors. We basically need that whole community approach in terms of education.
And thank you very much. Just by a nod of heads, it would not address the interdisciplinary request, but would webinars be helpful, something that you can do over your lunch hour or something that is sort of available for you to do after your docket's over? Just on even basics, maybe some of the basic things to look for. It would be judicial only. I know we need, once you bring interdisciplinary teams together, then you have to bring the team to the training. So would webinars be helpful? Just because it's
I think that, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of our conference meetings for the general equity judges and the probate judges, we now do by Skype. Any of those things that makes it easier and doesn't take us out of chambers or off the bench certainly is wonderful.
And I think because we are live streaming, we have a hard stop at 2:30. And so I know that all of you are thinking these wonderful thoughts about the wonderful things that you do. But I'm just going to thank you all deeply for coming, because I know that you get nothing out of this, you know, as a judge in terms of, I mean, you, besides the camaraderie, but what I mean is that it's not like you're going to a conference. It's very, very difficult to walk away from your courtroom, even for, it'll be, you know, 2 or 3 days for most of you. So I just want to thank you so much for coming. I think this was a wonderful exercise. Andy is indicating that he agrees, so I know, in fact, it was. And I just have so enjoyed. I mean, I could have done this for another couple hours. It's just wonderful hearing from all of you. So please, a big round of applause. Thank you so much, and travel safely. And we're all going to go get working on all the stuff that you told us. Thank you. Thank you.